That wasn't awkward in any way.
No.
That was
Like clockwork.
This takes me back to the very first Blue Box we recorded, where JR had this great idea of, let's all say part of a sentence each, and it will sound really cool. I'm like, I don't think it will. Oh, come on, let's just do it. Okay, then let's just do it. And it didn't sound really cool.
I wasn't expecting your English to be as bad as it was, though, Mark, to be fair. It has come
That's
on
true.
leaps and bounds
That's
in the
true.
intervening years.
That's true.
You are watching or listening to us turning 1,000, I guess. And that's what we'll be talking about for the next 60 minutes, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm Dylan.
I'm Iain.
I'm Jim.
I'm John.
I'm Mark.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Simon.
Hey, I didn't think that was going to go so well.
And you've all stopped listening.
Well, we had 334 episodes on the Blue Box podcast feed, which means that having reached 666 episodes on this feed, we have now achieved 1,000 episodes across the two feeds. So I thought that was reason enough to get extra people in for this one and to do something special. So we decided to review the remake, given that we'd already reviewed the original, of The Omen, seeing as it's episode 666. And then we decided not to do that, but instead we're going to do 2 Doctor Who stories in a bit. We're going to talk about the Dominators, but first we're going to talk about Death to the Daleks. So, I don't know. I'm going to try and, do this in some kind of an order. This is not going to be the usual conversation, is
JR,
it?
have you ever tried herding cats? I think you're about to get
He's about to.
I did it for our 10th anniversary as well, didn't it? I think there was 9 or 11 or something of us on that call. Mark,
Hello.
as the original other founding member of the Blue Box podcast, there were 3 of us on that first episode, the other one being Lee.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Simon joined like 3 episodes later. Mark.
That's where the quality suddenly started to go up.
Yeah.
Oh, I love you, Mark.
I love you too.
guys. Get a room.
I mean,
Hello, JR. Yes, you were saying.
Mark, when did you first see Death to the Daleks? Are you old enough to have seen it on broadcast?
No, don't be ridiculous. It came out the year I was born, you fool.
I couldn't remember if you were the same age as Simon and Lee. Simon and Lee possibly just about remember it, but okay. So did you? Okay, we'll do this out of order. Some of us remember from broadcast, some of us not.
Yeah.
What was your first? Did you experience the Target book first then?
Yes, that would have been my first exposure to it. It confused me no end because I couldn't understand why Tom Baker was being described as having this massive cloud of white hair. Just, yeah, I didn't get it. But I remember the cover.
At least it was Sarah
so,
Jane Smith, right?
Yeah. The cover was just one of those really iconic images that stuck with you.
Do you know how old? Do you know how old you would have been when you read that one?
Oh God, it would have been primary school.
Oh, so yeah, fairly young then.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we'll talk about the TV version in a bit when we're all in, but I'll stick with you for a minute, Mark.
Okay.
What did you think of the book? How did you think the book fit in amongst the other books? Was it better? Was it worse? Was it?
I didn't read that many of the targets, to be honest. I remember enjoying it, but we're talking like a good 40 odd years ago, so my memory of it is not the best. But yeah, I certainly enjoyed it enough. I've still got my copy of it knocking around here somewhere, so obviously didn't dislike it that much.
So I did see this on broadcast, and the first episode of this story was the most terrifying episode of Doctor. In fact, the first 2 episodes were the 2 most terrifying episodes of Doctor Who I had seen to that point, and probably lasted that way until about Genesis of the Daleks, I think. But I do vividly remember those first 2 episodes, all sorts of things. The High Priest, and the music the Exelons were singing,
really
all
freaky.
of us. Oh God, absolutely terrifying.
As a kid, that
And
would
I remember
absolutely scare the crap out of you.
Exactly. And I remember the Target book coming out. I guess I was about 9 because it wasn't one of the really early ones. I remember seeing it in a bookshop, picking it up because of the cover, realizing as I read it that that was the story I could remember. And I loved that one. I read that one over and over again. Then the VHS came out, but that's a different story. Simon, do you remember this from broadcast?
If I do, it's very, very vague. I mean, yeah, I could have been old enough. As I've said before, my earliest TV memory is Planet of the Spiders, which isn't that far off. So it's possible. But was there representation on the Weetabix cards?
Yeah, Bellal was on there.
Bellal, this is the thing, and he's the thing I always remember from it. So I think I probably knew him from the Weetabix cards before anything.
Right. Of course,
so I wouldn't have seen it until the VHS, and which was the first one I bought.
So tell me about the VHS. Had you read the Target book, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, yeah, it's the old chestnut. The cover was just amazing. I don't remember.
It's right behind us, isn't it?
Yeah. I didn't own a copy. It was a case of borrowing it from the library and reading it. So I would have read a hardback from the library. Don't remember a huge amount of that. I do remember the idea of all the different games and, like, you know, going into the different rooms and solving that and loving that format, which is probably still my favourite thing about this story.
You could remember that from when you'd seen it in Pyramids of Mars, right?
Yeah, possibly. But yes,
when you bought the VHS, then do you remember if that lived up to any expectations you might have had, or was it?
I remember it being shonky, but kind of being at that age where it was quite cool that it was shonky.
Oh, fair enough. I remember it being shonky and hating it, and then watching it again about 2 months later and thinking, oh, actually, I do quite like this. And every time it just goes a little bit back further up in your estimation.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That first episode is really atmospheric, and that's one of its strengths, I think.
Yeah,
it's when the Daleks turn up and that music comes in. You're like, oh, well, that's all the threat gone now.
Yeah, the music is the most disappointing thing about the VHS.
Yeah.
But then again, that's kind of grown on me a bit. I mean, it clearly doesn't work, but I don't mind it now. Matt, do you recall what your first experience of Death to the Daleks was?
I must have read the book, but like everybody else, I don't remember reading the book. And I'm interested to see what John and Jim are going to have to add at the end of this line. So I must have read the book. Don't remember the book. It was it was the second VHS I bought, I think, after Pyramids of Mars. And I mean, I loved it for the first 10 times I saw it, and then gradually I just stopped watching it. I haven't seen it in 25 years, I think, because I just overwatched it on video.
Yeah. When it was one of the 3 or 4 VHSs you had, if you wanted a fix of old Doctor Who, you put it on, and so you'd watch it 2 or 3 times a year, probably, wouldn't it?
And it was my first Pertwee as well, aside from 5 Doctors, because I can't remember watching the repeats in 1980 or whatever.
It was edited into like feature length, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, which is a real arse to get through it in one hit.
Well, it makes one particular cliffhanger a bit more effective.
Two, I'd argue.
The Twin Peaks cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But then again, the funny thing about the original VHS was it was edited all into one, but the first episode was only 525 lines at the time, whereas the rest was 625 lines. So as you went from episode 1 to episode 2, there was this sudden leap in quality. Anyway, now I have to try and remember what order everybody made their first appearance on this feed. So I think I'm coming to you next, Jim. And if I recall correctly, your first experience of this was the LP disc. Is that correct?
Jim, surely.
You are the other one who might remember the broadcast.
I do. It has a significant place in my Doctor Who history. It's the first episode of Doctor Who I ever saw in colour.
Wow.
We didn't have a
mid-series.
Yeah, well, it wasn't our set. I went to a birthday party, and colour TV weren't for the likes of us. But luckily, they had on it the Martin Wilson, I think it was. If he's listening,
it was. Yeah, you're right.
I think it was episode 2.
was the first colour episode I ever saw, and then I think by Robot we had a colour telly, so this was a big one for me for many reasons. That being one of them.
It's not a very colourful story, is it? To be honest, it's mostly beige and greys.
Well, at least it wasn't Colony in Space. It could have been worse, couldn't it? Yeah. A China clay pit in glorious colour.
But to be fair, though, in the 70s, a clay pit in glorious colour was pretty much as good as it got.
I mean, definitive image of Britain of the 70s.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Dylan, you must be next. You probably didn't see this until the Wilderness years or something.
I would have seen it in the early 90s, the edited VHS. So the cliffhangers still seem alien to me. I remember it being the first time I ever thought Doctor Who was a bit rubbish, just based on the fact that it's like everybody's saying, it's really scary to start with. And I remember finding it all scary. And I think, weirdly, my opinion just hasn't really changed. Everything's great about it, apart from the Daleks and the music when the Daleks plays. Remove the Daleks and all that, it's a much better story. And I think even like 10-year-old Dylan watching that VHS thought that as well. I just remember it not being one I went back to regularly.
Yeah, fair enough. Iain, as somebody who nearly made the Blue Box podcast, you probably don't remember this. Round at Al No's house. And you had to leave early, and we recorded a Blue Box podcast after you'd gone. That's true, isn't it? I do remember that.
Right. That is correct. I missed out by, half an hour for the sake of catching a train.
Unbelievable. So do you remember your first experience of this?
Yes, I like Simon. This was the first VHS I bought. I would have been, I guess, 12 or 13, and I hadn't read the book. I had no expectations or ideas about the story, and I just chose it because with that cover and that title, it was clearly the most important Doctor Who story there had ever been. So it was the absolute first purchase I had to make.
And how was it?
At the time, as an adolescent, it was just like really old and embarrassing and kind of, oh my God, this isn't anything like what I was promised. But the nostalgia of how long ago I saw it now and how often I've seen it, it's the most comforting comfort Doctor Who for me.
Excellent. And finally, John. And for you, this marks a particular milestone, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I was so thrilled by that part 3 cliffhanger, that stop, that I had that I exited my mother's womb and I insisted on being parked in front of the TV for episode 4 because I was not missing that as a starter.
Do you know the weird coincidence, John, is that in this episode, we're doing 2 stories, both of which are absolutely adjacent to the last 2 stories we did on this podcast feed, just by sheer coincidence. And this one is your birth story, and the last one, but one we talked about, was my birth story. So we have that in common too. So at the age of 212 hours, how did this play out for you?
I thought it was an absolutely thrilling resolution, and as I've noted, the first scenes in my lifetime and the last scene of before I was born are between John and Arnold. So
being John Pertwee and Arnold Yarrow, for the sake of anybody listening who's a bit confused about that.
What more thrill could I want from life? It's all been downhill since then.
Okay, here's Death to the Daleks then, 50 years on, because the reason we've chosen this is because this was the 50th anniversary. It was the last story to be broadcast exactly 50 years ago before we're recording and publishing this podcast. So we're doing the 50th anniversary story, basically, Death to the Daleks, which just happens to have worked out nicely in terms of a certain amount of nostalgia amongst us.
And I can't lie about my age anymore.
Well, now people are trying to work out whether I was born during the middle of the Mind Robber or Invasion of the Dinosaurs. I mean, I'm guessing the fact that I remember the broadcast of this one means it probably wasn't Invasion of the Dinosaurs, right? I want to put to bed a slight myth that this is like Terry Nation was writing the disappointing stories during the John Pertwee era or whatever. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think Terry Nation's anything like as bad a writer or as bland a writer or as hack a writer as people seem to think. We will cover this subject in much more detail in future episodes. But
it has got all those tropes, hasn't it? The Doctor is exiled to Exilon. We've got a character called Tarrant.
You don't like Pertwee years, do you, Mark?
I don't know what you mean, Matthew.
Doctor meets an expedition, and the Daleks turn up at the end.
Yeah.
Can I put forward my brief theory?
No.
Well, I'll just gonna answer Mark's point, and then you can put forward your theory. And then, but I mean, we'll probably have had to go before then and talk about the Dominators instead. But we'll get to you if we can, Matt. But Mark, while that is true, if that's happening once a year and there are 20 odd other episodes in between, 99% of the people watching aren't going to notice.
I think there's enough in it that's a little bit different from what we've had before that sets it apart. So it's not, a complete retread or anything. Planet of Daleks.
Also, I think while this is clearly, well, we're on a point, Matt, so I don't want to change the subject until we get off the point. I was only going to say, I think the point of this story is that while it's a boys' own adventure, lots of daring do, action, thrills, spills, etc., etc., there also is a little bit of politics in it, which kind of makes it suitable for the times, because it is about sort of, well, there are political shenanigans. And the whole point, although maybe it's not successfully seen through, of the Daleks losing their weaponry is to kind of give them a political edge too, which doesn't last very long. But go on then, Matt, put your theory forward.
So we know that Terry Nation sort of stopped briefly doing BBC Daleks because he wanted to do his own Dalek spin-off in America, and presumably he prepared for that slightly by thinking of storylines. Otherwise, he'd be an idiot. At least he wrote stories on the back of an envelope for it. So I just wonder what the chances of his two 70s, these two, like Planet and Death, being adaptations of ideas he had for his spin-off Dalek series with the Doctor added.
Very likely.
Is what you're saying, that these two stories are the reason he didn't get his Dalek spin-off?
No, I'm saying that actually the more I watched when I watched Planet and rewatching Death, it's actually more distinctive and more interesting than I remember it being. And it feels like it is a new idea for him rather than old ideas hashed out.
You can 100%. Because, I mean, whatever he was doing was going to be the Space Security Service or whatever it's called, the SSS, wasn't it, against the Daleks. You can 100% imagine the guys on the spaceship in this one. I can't even remember what they're called. The Marine something, Space Marine Corps.
Marine Space Corps,
yeah. You can 100% imagine them being SSS. You can 100% imagine the Thals in Planet of the Daleks being SSS. So it's not that weird an idea, really, is it?
No, I think it's partly down to his background as a comedy writer, because with a comedy writer, the first thing you do is you comfort the audience. So the setup is very comfortable for Doctor Who. It's Terry Nation. It's very typical. And then you can, the rest of the episode, confirmation of what you're doing. And that's where you kind of, I think, get Terry Nation as a writer. He's very much in the hands of the script editors, of the tone of the piece. So I think it's very much a blueprint. Go on,
I was going to say,
he's also go on.
You're saying that the obviously the Daleks were based on Nazis, so therefore it was the SS versus the SSS. So they were never going to take that on.
Especially with Pertwee in it.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll knock him across, you hit him in.
It's a fair point, though. But also, the other thing about it is, yes, like a comedy writer, he sort of, I guess, brings you into a comfortable place. But then the other thing I notice about him is that he's very much about, not necessarily what you would call these days a high concept, but very distinct, striking concept at the start of every story. So whether you actually think he sees that through, like the Daleks with the machine guns instead of the real, Dalek weapons, the ray guns or whatever they are, there is always a concept. And I suspect the concept for this story is, what if the Daleks lost the power in their guns and they had to do something else instead? I mean, clearly that's not a million miles away from what David Whittaker did in Power of the Daleks, but I have a suspicion Terry Nation perhaps didn't even see that, especially if he was in America at the time it was broadcast, which he might well have been, I suppose. So I do think that most of the Terry Nation stories do start with a decent concept, and it's whether you think he developed it very well from there.
I mean, the concept is the 3-day week. It's the power cuts of that time.
I suppose it is. Given the you'd had the sort of thing of the gods. What's it called? Vanilla of the gods? Honey of the gods?
Chariots
No,
of
it's
the
not.
gods.
Eric Von
Chariots of the Gods,
Oh.
that's the one. Had also come out recently, hadn't it? So you've got a combination of those two factors, right? So this is those
way
two
to start
things.
a Doctor Who story.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, so bringing this down to what do we think of it now? I think it's terrific. I watched it this week with my 9-year-old. He was absolutely thrilled by it throughout, except the cliffhanger. I pointed out the worst cliffhanger ever was going to come along, and it went into the cliffhanger, and he was like, "Oh my God, was that it?" But he didn't even know the cliffhanger had happened until he was absolutely certain that was the end titles playing. Point being, I think this is both the stories we're talking tonight are stories with not very good reputations, really. But actually, I think this is way better. And this is the perfect example of Doctor Who overstretching its budget by having an ambition that's way beyond what it can keep up with, but in the best possible way, I think. So this is a story that keeps you engaged throughout, I think. I don't know, what are everybody else's opinions of it? Sort of like, what do they think of it now? Iain, I'm aware you've not spoken for ages.
No, I've sort of
So I'm going to come
glazed.
to you
I'm
first.
just
Yeah.
here we go.
I mean,
No,
do you
I'm just
like it? Do you
enjoying-
hate it?
I'm just enjoying listening to a very good podcast episode.
Oh, you've got your own on, have you?
Yeah,
What
what's
have you
it?
doing?
Yeah, I'm running two laptops here. No, I mean, I still love it. I think it's unusually kinetic for a Terry Nation Dalek story. Each episode is it moves on and it's in a different location and there are different stakes. I think it's for that reason it's sort of head and shoulders above most other Dalek stories, I think, and the ambition doesn't outstrip the production budget egregiously badly. I think everyone does the absolute best they can when often they'll settle for second best. And I just think it's the perfect example of 70s Who, really.
I'm trying to think back to 1974 and whether I can remember what that probe was like, but I don't really have any memories of that.
Are we?
Well, no,
Back to Doctor Who.
Yeah,
Oh, you're
leaving
I
aside
wanna
your
go
hospital
there.
experience.
Yeah. Oh dear. Oh, that's not any better.
Alien
either.
abduction.
No.
But I suspect that on a tiny television set back in 1974, on low quality mono sort of whatever, I suspect some of those special effects would have looked pretty good back then. And you had, my little boy was watching this and he was surprised at the amount of Dalek devastation he was getting to see, with Daleks blowing up and falling into ponds and stuff. He thought all that stuff was terrific, and that was not something that he was expecting from old Doctor Who. He's seen enough of it not to expect those kind of pyrotechnics and the sort of physical stunts and things like that. And he was asking, well, how did they do that? They didn't really destroy one of their own Daleks, did they? They only had about 4. And I was saying, no, they had to make sort of like, extra shells so they could blow those up instead and all this kind of thing. So he was like all engaged with that kind of stuff. I don't know, anybody else? Simon, is this still a story that stands up for you, do you think?
It's been quite
because
a while
I'm aware
since
that
I
we're allowed
watched it.
to.
Yeah, it's been quite a while since I watched it properly. I do remember my last viewing being the best of them and taking something from it, but it's always a thing re-experiencing that era of Doctor Who anyway. I mean, it was with the VHS. It was aside from the many faces of Doctor Who, this was my first kind of foray into it. I don't think anything else had been shown on TV since then of that era. So therefore, this was yet another one, because I mean, all we'd had was the Three Doctors and Carnival of Monsters, with which to gauge what the Pertwee era is actually like. So this was the first one, the first Sarah Jane that I'd seen since broadcast. With that coupling of Pertwee and Sarah Jane, and then obviously I'd experienced the whole Tom Baker era. So seeing Sarah Jane with a different Doctor again was just all a bit strange. I guess it's one of those where the curiosity kind of overtakes the quality.
I think the quality's great. I grew up watching the VHS thinking this is a bit shonky, this is a bit dark and grim and dull. But actually rewatching it with the cliffhanger, it struck me this is the first time possibly I've seen it with cliffhangers. I don't think I really watched the DVD that much. But actually even the probe was very good. Thank you very much.
I thought the CSO was pretty good in this one, to be fair.
The exploding Daleks were better than the one in Resurrection of the Daleks. The one they're getting thrown out of the warehouse.
Oh, and are these silver Daleks not the best Daleks as well? I think
the colour scheme is very
also the city scenes were really good. The city scenes were really clean and bright.
Yeah,
the antimatter baddies were really creepy.
Yeah.
Really creepy, really sinister. Yeah. And I didn't mind the Daleks. I didn't notice the music because I don't notice music. But the Daleks didn't bother me at all.
Look at you.
I think the big issue for me is the Daleks. I think all of it works, but I don't think the production's taking the Daleks seriously. I don't think they're threatening. I don't think they're menacing. I don't think that music helps. The music everywhere else in the episode is fine. It's just that Dalek theme.
Yeah,
and I think that is the problem with it. Like, its nation script is fine. It's a good Terry Nation script, but it's
in
just
the book they're great.
Yeah, but exactly. But yeah, it just doesn't take the main threat seriously, and so you're more terrified about a guy with a bit of tarpaulin over his head.
Absolutely. Oh, in fact, if you'd have had the two factions of Exelons being the threat, and the Doctor and Sarah Jane and these people after this Peridium are there and that's the threat instead, this would have gone down as one of the creepiest Doctor Who's ever.
Yeah.
The Daleks probably for most kids was a mitigating factor because it made it less scary and more exciting.
See, I think that's where Terry Nation missed a trick there, really, because he called the planet Exelon. These people are all hunting around for the mysterious perineum. He could have called it Our Solus, couldn't he?
Oh dear God!
I knew it's bridge. You were going. Can I just talk as a 6-year-old? You were saying whether or not the probe would have been frightening. I thought it was brilliant at the time. I thought the dissolving acetone on polystyrene cool. City was fantastic as well. Yeah, it really worked for this 6-year-old anyway.
I remember
still does for this 56-year-old.
Oh yeah, watching it this week. There's stuff with the city at the end, the melting city at the end. You can clearly see how they did it, but it just looks terrific, really, on screen.
I think so. Yeah.
Mark, given you're a big fan of the Pertwee era, how does the story stand up for you?
I had quite a good time with it, actually. He's never going to be my favourite Doctor, but it rattles along at quite a nice pace. I think Bilal's fantastic. Just another in a long line of aliens that seems to sort of tag along and become a sort of surrogate companion. It's suitably creepy in places. You were saying about the music before in the cave where they're about to be sacrificed. That was really quite freaky. I agree with Dylan on the Daleks aren't super threatening, but it's just a rollicking good tale. There's a bit of politics in there, bit of a look at colonialism. I can't even say it now. Colonialism.
That's all right. John Pertwee can't say illuminate, so it doesn't matter.
So yeah,
he's not too annoying, is he, Pertwee, in this one?
No, he's my major gripe with him is when he treats the companions like absolute arseholes, and I don't think he really does that in this one.
This is the period where Pertwee was clearly running around being very aware of his back and trying not to.
I did
screw
notice
himself.
a very, very obvious wig in the fight scene. And speaking of wigs, I mean, Jeebus, there were some pretty stellar hairdos in this one.
I've got to say though, we were playing Spot the Stuntman standing in for the Doctor in this, but when we watched the Dominators, we were playing Patrick Troughton didn't make it out to the location.
Someone had a holiday.
Every time the Doctor's in the location stuff, he's always got his back to the camera, or he's moving really quickly, so it can't quite catch him.
One of his 6 family holidays for the year.
One of his 6 families.
When he says 6 family holidays, that means it's just a holiday with 6 families involved.
Yeah.
John, any more thoughts?
Well, once I got past the opening shot where I was expecting the guy to just go, "It's," it's fine. I think by this point the Daleks are a comforting thing almost. You know, they're not what they were to 60s kids. It's just, it's a Daleks again. Really nice to see them. So you can get through 4 comfortable weeks of Doctor Who. I think what Iain said is right. It's archetypal 70s Doctor Who. It's like Planet of the Daleks. It fills a hole for 6 weeks in Planet's case, 4 weeks in this case. So it's just very typical. It's just there for me. I like it, and I prefer the book. I think it's like so much. I was disappointed after coming to it through the book because the book in my head is great.
The music's better in the book, isn't it?
Oh, the music's. So it was all right, but.
Right, I'm going to move us along because we do have a whole other story to talk about. So, John, if you want to give me a score, and if anybody else has got any more thoughts they want to throw up as I come around, just throw some more thoughts in as we go through, and then we'll move on to the other story. But, John, a score out of 10?
Well, it was all uphill for me after this, so 6, I think.
Oh, fair enough. Meanwhile, I thoroughly enjoyed it this week, and I've enjoyed it more and more every time I've watched it since that VHS came out. So I'm going to go for an 8. Dylan, any more thoughts and give it a score?
No more thoughts. It's a 6 from me too.
Fair enough. Right, Iain, how about you?
There are a couple of Pertwee stories I still haven't seen. Most of them I've seen exactly once. This one I've seen probably about 30 times, and mainly for the place it holds in my heart rather than for any objective reasons. I would happily give it a 9. Yeah.
Ooh.
Excellent. Matt, how about you then?
I'm going to give it an 8. And actually, rewatching it has made me think about rewatching some of the old ones that I had on VHS that I couldn't face before. Because I think it gets better each time I watch it now.
It's Monster of Peldon for you next then.
Jim, a score from you.
9 out of 10 for me. It probably was the first time I watched it, and has been every time I watched it since. It's an absolute banger. It's one of the most entertaining Doctor Who series, I think. It's terrific stuff.
Fair enough. And Mark?
I'm going to give it a 7, I think.
Fair enough. The Dominators, then. Is there anybody here whose first experience of this was anything other than the VHS release?
Target book. The Target book, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I should have said Target book. Although the Target book was a fairly late one, wasn't it?
Mid-80s.
So this was
85,
yeah.
Somewhere in there.
Was it an Ian Marter one?
It was an Ian Marter.
They tried to, because they had to inject as much adventure and fantasy into it as possible.
I have very little memory of any of the sort of Target books from that period. Does anybody have any particular memories of the Target book of this?
I remember the cover. I thought the Quarks looked incredible. These massive, towering robots. And it turned out they were tiny little shoe boxes.
Mini
Played
bars.
by children, weren't they?
Yeah. It's very, very different from the actual TV episodes when you come to them. Because it's Ian Marter being Ian Marter.
Yeah. But the VHS then, so the VHS would have been the first time any of us were able to watch it. And for me, So this is a story that has a terrible reputation, but I had no idea it had a terrible reputation at the time. And this was probably about the third Patrick Troughton VHS, I think, or the third Patrick Troughton story I saw. And my memory of watching this on VHS is that I enjoyed it more than any of the other black and white stories I'd seen. I tell you why. I think most of the black and white stories, especially the William Hartnell's ones, were very slow moving. And so they were very much an acquired taste by comparison with how Doctor Who would be by the 70s and probably the 80s as well. But the Dominators, I think, feels more like a 70s story that just happens to have been made in black and white during the Patrick Troughton era. It feels like a John Pertwee story, frankly. This is the exact midpoint between Colony in Space and, well, Death to the Daleks, or it's Terry Nation doing Colony in Space, isn't it, this? And so when I saw the VHS, I didn't think it was the best thing I'd ever seen, but I remember enjoying it a lot more than, say, the Dalek invasion of Earth, which I'd liked, but I remember just enjoying this more. I think I was more engaged with it. So what are anybody else's memories of the first time they saw this? Dylan.
So one of the reasons we're doing this today is because the legendary Uncle Kev, who gets mentioned on this podcast and indeed my own quite a lot, passed away recently. And this was a story that I have very strong memories of watching 3 Doctor Who related things with him. Who on Earth is Tom Baker? The Zero Imperative, and the Dominators.
He started you at the top then.
Yeah.
Kev didn't have any kids, so he was the uncle that spoiled me and bought me lots of Doctor Who VHSs. I remember going to his for a weekend, and he was like, "I've got a new Doctor Who for you. It's called The Dominators." And I remember sitting there and watching it. I don't think it was my first Troughton, but it was definitely the second or third. And there was, again, I would have been 8 or 9, but there was nothing about it that I remember thinking this is bad. But I remember Kev laughing at it a lot, and I couldn't understand why. But it's one that obviously isn't very popular, but I think there was something in it that appealed to me when I was a kid. And I think the thing that appeals to me now is it's Doctor Who does a B movie. It's not fantastic, but it's a lot of fun, and I always have a great time watching it.
I want to get into later on what it's all about. And obviously, we'll come back later on to what you've just talked about too. But I'll carry on going around the circle. Mr. Cockram.
Hello.
Do you remember the first time you saw this and what you thought of it when you did?
I think it would have been UK Gold in the 90s.
Right.
It's one of my favourite TARDIS teams, so that helps a lot. We have recently covered this one on All of Time and Space, and that episode will be going out on Friday as we record this.
Clang.
So I'll move on.
Well done, sir.
And I think one of my sort of takeaways from it was that it's, as a season opener, as this was for season 6, it's not exactly the all-action banger that you're really hoping for.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, this often gets said, but this is one of the things that I never get. That first episode has got all the characters making their way to this radioactive island in the middle of the sea. I don't know how you could get more action-packed.
Well, I think it's when you have the action hero is a middle-aged man in a curtain for a dress. It's not. Didn't really do it for me, but that's fine. Each their own.
But see, the curtains for dresses thing comes into its own later on, when from about the halfway through episode 2 onwards, you have to watch the entire rest of the story with a cushion on your lap.
Apoplectic. Sorry.
There are a lot of old grey men in this story, aren't there?
Well, if that's what JR gets with a cushion on his lap.
Yeah. Whatever gets you through the night, JR.
No one's going to judge you.
No, except me, obviously.
Simon, do you remember first watching this?
Vaguely. Thing is, that whole Boba Fett effect of less is more. Boba Fett was a lot more interesting when we knew less about him. And there was that lovely promotional shot of Patrick Troughton with all the different aliens, and there was a quark there. And of course, I thought the quarks looked amazing. Couldn't wait to see them. And then my sister's father-in-law recorded a load of stuff off. Was it a Doctor Who weekend on BSB? It was even before it was
1990-ish, I think.
Yeah. So I had a copy on VHS and kind of, I don't remember getting through it in one go, and maybe I didn't finish it. So I don't know whether I've actually watched The Dominators all the way through.
There we are.
Confessions of
the
a
point
podcast.
is, Doctor Who was never meant to be watched all in one go anyway, really, was it? So,
No. So, yeah. Vague as usual.
Sorry. Even in the 90s, Simon was ahead of his time. It was ultimately
meant to be watched to the end, though.
Yes, that is fair. I was trying to gloss over that.
Okay. Such is the nature of narrative, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Matt, while you're there, did you watch this on VHS, B-Sky B, DVD?
No,
Not at all.
Because I gave 3 blank videotapes to a friend at my youth club to record the B-Sky B Doctor Who weekend. And then I spent about 2 months chasing him for them. And then it turns out he hadn't done it. And it was the most disappointing. So I watched this on bought VHS, and it's an odd. I mean, it doesn't feel like you haven't seen it before, because it's kind of the archetype of what people think 60s Doctor Who is. It's what Gatiss parodied when he did the Pilot of Death or whatever, the Caves of
Death.
Yeah.
Caves.
And it's a quarry. It's Troughton and the quarry. So it's this and the Savages are the two that are most like you imagine Doctor Who to be, but actually wasn't like an awful lot. So watching this on video, I felt like I'd already seen it. I can't remember. It's
very similar to the Crotons as well, of course. That's the other one, a bit like this, isn't it?
Yeah. So I struggle to remember the story even now. I mean, it feels like a really, really long prelude to the Mind Dropper, basically. It gives a reason for that first episode of the Mind Dropper. But as this is all for Uncle Kev, it's great. It's a fantastic story. It's like the holy grail of Doctor Who. Thank God this one exists. and Daleks doesn't exist. Yeah. Thank goodness.
Iain, The Dominators. How was it for you? How is it for you?
So I think I first watched this. Mark, when did we record our episode of All of Time and Space, which you can download
a few months ago
Friday.
now? Yeah.
So I first saw it a few months ago, and it's one of those things. I get a text message from Mark. He says, "Oh, I'm free in about 3 hours. Let's do an episode." I get no notice, so I have to watch the whole thing in one go.
The case.
No, so I watched the whole thing in one go, and it bored me shitless. It was.
Ian, I wish you would just say what you really think and not beat around the bush like that.
I like to sit on the fence.
Yeah.
It wasn't perhaps the sort of absolute zenith of irritating Troughton for me, but it's a weak start to the series, and it's at least 4 episodes too long. I was underwhelmed. I would say.
The people who are making it agreed with you that it was too long, right?
Yeah, it's a story so stretched it commits suicide an episode early.
It wasn't the only one that thought about it.
just to put your viewpoint into perspective, Ian, that same weekend, the B-Sky B thing, I'm pretty sure the Space Museum was the other one that he recorded for me.
Oh, wow. What a double
whammy.
Yeah, it's a good weekend, that was.
And yet somehow you became a Doctor Who fan. I don't see the linky there.
Got up with some sleep.
Yeah.
He's a masochist.
I would have been asleep in the 90s.
I think for kids, this would have worked a treat, wouldn't it? John, have I asked you yet? I've got so many people in front of me. I don't know who I've asked and who I haven't
think
asked.
Jim's still to go as well, but that's.
Well, I'm saving Jim for last because I want to ask him if he watched it on broadcast or not.
Oh, you bitch!
Right, that's it. I'm going.
Yeah, it would have been the VHS. I don't think I had till after '92 because I definitely saw the Mind Dropper first, and I saw that on the Resistance is Useless season.
Right. Yes, of course.
So yeah, so it's. I think I picked it up from Trek Mark in Newport Market, where it was £3 because obviously I didn't have that much of an income at the time. So yeah, got it home, and I I love the Quarks. They basically say the story, and Rago and Topa bitching. That was always brilliant. But the rest of it, the actual plot is just like, oh my god, it's just people arguing about, do we do this or don't we? Well, there you know, we know where we're going by the end of the story.
I actually think that is quite an interesting subject for a story to tackle.
But it's the anti-Malcolm Hulk story, really.
Yeah,
sort of is. But then again, I think that's a valid viewpoint. So okay, all right, I'll come back to you, Jim. But seeing as John's unhappily, unhealthily, whatever raised the subject, let's do a little bit on this now for a couple of minutes. So this is generally reviled amongst fans because it takes a right-wing political stance, a sort of jingoistic political stance. But I think it's just a pragmatic political stance, isn't it? To all intents and purposes, because
it's anti-pacifism, I would say, more than anything jingoistic.
Yeah, it's anti-war protesting, isn't it? That's what inspired them to do it.
And isn't this
Summer '68 stuff?
But this is basic. Well, exactly. And this is 1968. The counterculture revolution is crashing around people's ears as this has been written and produced. And not only that, it tells exactly the same story as Terry Nation had done in the Daleks, where you've got the sort of the Eloi, the sort of innocent Eloi wandering around.
Terry Nation does it in one scene, not 5 episodes.
No, he does it in 7 episodes, really, doesn't he? That's kind of... He doesn't do the whole thing.
He does it in that one scene.
But this doesn't do that.
One of them's jumping a chasm. Don't forget.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of the point, though, is both stories have a sort of naive Eloi running around a Garden of Eden that's been destroyed by war. In the Daleks, it's
both
literally
nuclear,
war.
Isn't it? I think.
Yeah, both nuclear destruction.
Yeah, but they're not exactly Eloi, though, are they? Because these are people who've made a stance because they're aware of the war that happened. The Eloi is just some sort of product.
I'm generalising.
Centuries behind them.
You also get a slight sense that Terry Nation was basically talking about appeasement from the Second World War. But who wrote The Dominators? Haseman. Was it Haseman?
Haseman and Liggett.
Yeah. You get the feeling they really are talking about the Vietnam protests, Nixon, counterculture, this whole sort of thing going on.
Those damn
Maybe
hippies.
not Nixon.
But I think the broader sense is that politically, if you ignore that point, but watch this through a broader lens, in the sense of things like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, for example, I think the story makes a pragmatic sense in that you can't just turn your back entirely on the weapons of war, unless you're the last people left in the universe, because there always will be somebody. So I don't know. For me, so clearly, politically, peace amongst the universe would be the aim. But I think the point of the story ultimately is, while it might be an aim, it can't be the be-all and end-all, because if it is the be-all and end-all, you end up opening yourself up to exploitation.
It's the same thing what Paul Cornell puts in one of the New Adventures is, who takes the bins out in paradise?
Yeah, absolutely. And isn't this what the Time Machine was like about as well? Basically, it's the same story again there.
It does motivate the Dulcians nicely, because the reason that they're pacifist is because there's just an imaginable horror that's happened. And it's a perfectly valid reaction. So they do. Yeah, go on.
It's not an like they haven't had a war. They just let off a bomb to see what would happen. Yeah. So it's not quite they're gone, oh, we'll never do that again. They were just like, nuclear bombs, they're clearly bad. We'll never do it.
Oh, this is Oppenheimer of the Sixth Century.
Yeah. But kind of the point there
where's the Oscar for these guys?
Obviously, all the people who were skilled in tailoring were killed in the blast, so they ended up having to...
They had to improvise.
Yeah.
But kind of the point there, the logic gap there is, once you've set off the bomb and you know such bombs can be set off, you should want to protect yourself from such bombs, not just shove them away in a dark corner and forget about them, which is kind of what's happened here. So I don't know. I don't think it's politically great, but at the same time, I don't think it's as egregious as some people make it out to be. I think some people's whole reason for disliking this story is the politics of it. But then I think sometimes you've just got to take those things on the chin a bit. Jim, I never did get to you. I'm getting to you now. Did you watch it on broadcast then? It's the pace you pulled, right?
The moment's gone. You left me waiting too long to comment on this. No, I didn't, because as I wasn't born, I elected not to watch it.
Casual.
Yeah, call yourself a fan.
Lack of commitment. I don't remember if I saw a B-Sky B recording or VHS first. I certainly did one of those before reading the book. And I was fascinated to watch it because it was a Troughton story that I hadn't seen. I love all the black and white location work, so that was a treat here, because it's the same place as they filmed Tomb of the Sidemen, isn't it? The same director as well.
Yeah.
Morris Barry, yeah.
Morris Barry.
Yeah, Morris Barry. Yeah, some
God! As soon as you get him in the studio, though, he's terrible.
Yes.
Yeah. He wants to be a film director, doesn't he? He doesn't want to be a Lime Grover director. But the second time I watched, I remembered how much I liked it the first time, because it was interesting archive telly, and I was very disappointed the second time. And then watching it a third time, it was slightly better than I remembered it. It's not a standout. It's certainly not a great way to kick off a new season, but there's stuff here to enjoy, I think.
I think the fact that it keeps moving, it all takes place basically on the island, but it does seem to have a sense whereby it keeps moving. I certainly got that impression when I first watched it, and watching it again this week, I was never bored during the story. There were moments where I was irritated with the people on the mainland and their conversations about the fact that they were not going to do anything because they weren't the kind of people who do anything. That got a bit irritating, but I was never bored.
Well, it's anti-establishment as well, really, isn't it? Because they're just like a bunch of sort of red tape, bureaucratic people who are incapable of making a decision. A bit like the deciders in Full Circle.
Yeah, so Joel Ford earlier say they're like a parish council.
So this managed to go at the kids and the adults as well. No one is spared.
And so, Mark, that's why they cast that guy as Cully, right?
It's young Playboy figure.
You
have no authority here, Jackie Weaver.
Very much so.
Right, if anybody's got any more thoughts, scream them out now, or shall we?
To say on that opening the season bit, it wouldn't have felt like a season opener. I don't think there's a notion of that in the 60s, and it comes straight off the back of Evil of the Daleks repeat.
Yeah,
so it's almost like that one continuous run.
Yeah, that is a fair point. Even makes a comment about that in the opening scene, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is the first time there was no break at all, actually, isn't it, Dylan? Sorry.
I was just going to say it's more interesting than the Abominable Snowmen, which is one of Haseman and Lincoln's other story.
Absolutely, I'm going to have to take you on that one, Dylan.
Snowmen is possibly the most boring Doctor Who story that there ever was. It's impossible to get
through. That comes the one just after the Abominable Snowmen.
I'm not having that.
And also, it spawned Quark Mania. Do you not remember Quark Mania? The Quarks were everywhere.
Quark soaps.
You know.
I mean, for the guys who wrote, for the guys who wrote about a great intelligence that they called the Great Intelligence, it's a bit on the nose of them.
The Great Imagination.
The Dominators here. You wonder where they got the name Quarks from. They should have just have been called Childish Robots, shouldn't they?
They could have Oppenheimers.
Right, let us score this and get out of here. Mark, you go first.
I love it. Just destroying the background there. I love the TARDIS team, and they really are the only reason to watch this. It's dull. 5.
Oh, that is pretty savage. I'm going to be a bit generous and give it a 7. I think it's probably a 6, but I'm going to be a bit generous because I enjoyed rewatching it this week far more than I expected to. John?
I do I love the Quarks because they're part of that 60s psychedelic thing where they don't know what the hell they're coming up with next. And I do like Rago and Toba. That does keep me going for the episode. So I'll go with a 6, and I think I'll be generous on that. But in the memory of Uncle Kev, I'm being generous.
Not that generous. Matt.
I think it should be a 6, but for two reasons it becomes a 7. I think Troughton knows that the script is duff and it's a bit dull, and that means he puts more Troughtonness into it, and that can only be a good thing. I think the dull stories are the ones where he goes for it, and he and Fraser Hines had the most fun trying to improvise. And for Uncle Kev, I'm bumping it up to a 7.
Iain.
Yeah, so I
you
think
do have to give this a score that's actually in figures.
Right. I think I gave it a 5 on All of Time and Space, which is available on Friday.
It is,
but
yeah.
Last Friday, as people
podcatchers.
watch this or listen to this, I should say.
Have you changed the format at all?
No.
Oh,
We've redecorated in
I've
a
changed
certain
my
way.
trousers.
Don't like it.
Actually, if your review of this is going out on Friday to come as we record, so is this episode going out on Friday as we record?
It's going to be an absolute feast for the ears, isn't it?
Total domination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to give it an Uncle Kev 5, which is a 6.
Oh, lovely. John.
You've done me, but I just can't remember. I was disappointed when I took the Dominators video from.
Oh, so I have. No, Jim, you were the.
Like, wasn't an 8 certificate, unfortunately.
I've got too many sets of initials and too many faces in front of me. Jim.
Yeah, this is getting an Uncle Kev uplift from 5 to 6. It's what he would have wanted.
It is.
He'd probably give it a 2.
It's his legacy.
2 for the laughs.
Go on then, Dylan.
Nothing for the rest.
I really enjoyed watching it this time. I was being very nostalgic about my family history and stuff, which weirdly involves the Dominators, which it just shouldn't. I love the Quarks. I like the Dominators. I love the TARDIS team. I'm giving it an 8, but it's a very generous 8. It's purely out of nostalgia.
Hey, nostalgia is a large factor of why we watch classic Doctor Who anyway, isn't it?
Still shit, really.
Right. That's it then. The Death to the Daleks and the Dominators. I haven't fired up the randomizer, so we'll find out what we're going to do next when I'll let you know in the thread, but it's not going to happen on this video or on this audio feed. Matt's really disappointed.
This is like the cliffhanger of the Dominators. It's like, what's Thomas going to do to get out of the way?
It will be something. Until then, though, I think we should all raise a glass. Or it's not a glass, it's a thing in my... So Uncle Kev.
To Uncle Kev.
To Uncle Kev. And until next time, then, after we've said goodbye, we're all going to sort of back slowly out of shot.
Yeah, I think we should.
I mean, for Uncle Kev, right? It's what he would have wanted. Until then, I was JR.
I was Dylan.
I was Iain.
I was Jim.
I was John.
I was Mark.
I was Matt.
And I was Simon.
And we will.
What an exit.
He's gone.
He's gone.
Are you all right, Matt?
I think the rest of us should just stay put now. Can we talk about another story?
Can we talk
Saw
about
a
the
flailing hand.
I thought we were disappearing after we'd announced our name.
Oh.
Sorry, I
I
missed.
thought you'd gone to join Uncle Kev.
Not like that.
misinterpreted the brief.
It was a 6 from me, Matt.
We will speak again soon. Right, Dylan's done it. Jim's going for it.
Fucking microphone.
I mean, all I can say is that's better.